This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Mac, Jack, and Jim This Week in Sports. Today is Sunday, August, is it the 6th? No, it's the 7th. It is the 7th.
It is.
And I have with me two-time Super Bowl champion Jim Jeffcoat, and not quite filling in for Jack, but in the middle there, Keith Engel from TGI Sports.
I am in the Jack slot, so I tried to look a little older today.
And we're definitely, and I apologize, we're getting a little bit of a late start today. It was hard to get this lawnmower going. You know, I had to do a couple of pulls to get it started this morning. So, but we're back, we're up and we're running, and things are moving in the direction they're supposed to. Good morning, guys. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great.
As am I. Fun day yesterday with the Hall of Fame inductions, obviously, in the NFL, and not so fun for Yankee fans, but we'll go there.
What is it? Four game loss?
Four games in a row. Jordan Montgomery shuts them down for 5 innings yesterday, and that's it's not pretty right now.
Where's Joey Gallo when you need him?
That's exactly that. This is the Joey Gallo curse. You got rid of Joey.
Joey Gallo needs to be on this team.
So that's exactly how I feel. This is the Joey Gallo curse, and that you guys are slowly just going to drift away now because.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen. But
we won't win for 100 years now, like the Red Sox.
Oh Lord, oh Lord, don't say that.
But it's funny because even at the Phillies game yesterday, there were numerous Yankees fans, people wearing Yankees shirts, and it's like, of course, I have to mess with each and every one of them because they are definitely out on their own, And then there was the random couple of Mets fans that I had to also poke a little bit of fun at.
Why are they at a Phillies game where their team's not playing? That's really odd to me. But
that's been the thing right now. Wearing the jersey that you want to wear to a game. And it has nothing to do with the teams that are playing anymore. I've seen Cubs, I've seen Toronto, and this is at a Phillies game where they're playing Washington.
Interesting.
So
it's
like I said, there was more than a couple Yankees jerseys. And then you have the guy with the Dodgers hats on, and I'm like, and I point each and every one of them out. I'll be like, I don't like your hat.
So, I got to jump on this before we move off it, because I lose my Yankee card just because I'm a little critical of the team here and there, but guys who go to different games and their team isn't even playing and they don't lose their Yankee cards, I don't understand.
I don't either.
Well, they're representing. I mean, so how bad can it really be?
Well, you got to represent, but you can't watch your team on TV if I'm at the Philly game, for crying out loud.
No, you're right about that. But who really wants to watch them right now? They stink.
Oh, there's that. I'm not allowed to say those critical things. I can't be critical of my team, or I'll be off this show entirely, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I think there's it was bound to happen. It was bound to happen because they were playing so well. They're just in a slump, and teams get in slumps. It's just that they got to fight through it.
If I find a way to score runs without hitting home runs, which is always the problem.
Exactly.
Andrew Benintendi, who came in here to kind of be the anti-Joey Gallo. I don't know what he did yesterday, but he was 1 for 23, I think. Before that, Hicks is in an 0 for 29 slump again. It's hard to have guys like that in the lineup and score runs. And Stanton's out, obviously. So hopefully they'll get through this. It's the dog days of summer. They get a big lead.
Yeah.
Oh,
and that's just Yeah, I
Their
wouldn't
home
panic yet.
advantage is dried up.
I wouldn't panic yet. Only thing that, like I said, that always scared me about the Yankees is how they played Houston, because Houston is really the team in the
Which
yes,
is
the
what they're
American
playing
League.
out, Jim, right? That's what they're playing out for, is home field advantage. And Jack can
Exactly.
put home field advantage all he wants. It's important.
Exactly.
I don't care
It is
what you.
important. I agree. You know, you don't want to play down there. That's a small park too. Minute Maid.
Yeah, it's fluky stuff happens there, you know. So
Yeah.
plus there's all those bangs and garbage cans banging and everything.
Exactly. So that makes sense.
So I wanted to get into this, and I actually have a very interesting, question for today.
Yes.
And especially since that there was the Hall of Fame inductees were inducted yesterday, and Bryant Young happened to be one of them. And my first question specifically goes to you, Jim, because you're going to be the only one that can really answer to this. So Bryant Young was put in there, and he was obviously a defensive tackle. He had just about 90 sacks, and had a pretty good career. I mean, I don't know that he, when I go to look back at Hall of Fame, do I think he was Hall of Fame worthy? First off, my first question to you is, do you feel that he was Hall of Fame worthy?
Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was that, if you look. And he did have a very good career. But he is a lot similar to Richard Seymour, don't you think?
I was going to say the same exact thing.
He's a lot similar. The one who I have problems with is Tony Baselli. Baselli really made it on a game against Bruce Smith. One game.
Yeah.
I mean, Baselli was okay. There are better offensive tackles out there than Tony Baselli right now. I don't know if there's better defensive tackles than Seymour or Young that you could really honestly say. They were both very good players.
Yeah.
And
Jim,
they were exceptional.
Jim, you really can't take the stats, the same stats into account that you would for a defensive tackle you can for a defensive end, right?
Yeah, everybody thinks Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald is an asterisk. He is just incredible. He is just an incredible player. Yeah, but he was, and he's a dominant player. And at his time in their schemes, Young and also Seymour, but they're not Joe Green or Aaron Donald.
As I think about this, obviously, when we're talking about Aaron Donald right now is probably the best defensive tackle in the game, if not has been for a long time.
Yes.
But because of Bryant Young going in, is Fletcher Cox a Hall of Famer based off of that?
It's a hard one. That's a hard one.
It's intangibles you have to judge. It seems to me like, and Jim, you can answer this as Peg said before better than any of us. It seems like with defensive tackles and even offensive alignment and such, you can't look at stats as much as you got to look at the intangibles. And if you haven't seen him play a lot, like what Richard Seymour is a great example as you had a comparison. Watching Richard Seymour play a lot, you look at the stat sheet at the end of the day and you go, well, he didn't do much of it all, but he disrupted everything.
Exactly.
Other guys.
That's the same thing Bryant Young did.
Right.
Fletcher Cox, you have to ask, has he done it over an extended period of time?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you would have to ask if Fletcher Cox, because if you say that, if Jerome Brown didn't die, God rest his soul, he would have been a Hall of Famer.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt.
And you can't put Fletcher Cox in the same category as Jerome Brown. Jerome Brown was a special player. I've seen this guy. He was there. Fletcher Cox is a very good player. Don't get me wrong. But is he a Hall of Famer? That's going to remains to be seen.
Well,
it's so subjective too with the voters, and it's who people. And the NFL is a little different than Major League Baseball, right? Because you're going to put in X amount of guys every year, whether they're deserving or not. That's one of the problems.
And I don't know. You asked me that, and that's a good question. Is he a Hall of Famer? There's going to be some debate on it. He's going to get the opportunity. too.
Yeah, and when you look at it, when you look at the comparison between him and Bryant Young, using Bryant Young as the baseline. I mean, they both won one Super Bowl. They're both on the all, for Bryant Young's on the all 90s team. Cox is on the all 210 team.
Mm-hmm.
Bryant Young had 4 Pro Bowls. Fletcher Cox had 6 Pro Bowls. Now, there was the comeback player of the year for Bryant Young and the rookie of the year that was the 2 awards that he won that Cox has not. But I mean, they both had 1 year all pro. And like I said, one had
they change everything all the time. That's the one thing I've ever understood about how they vote. Because you look at some guys and you're like, what? I played against this guy and he was good. Like, for example, ESPN just did a poll with writers, which is kind of interesting. And they said the greatest of all time at positions. And they put Anthony Munoz as the number 1 offensive tackle. I played against Munoz. And don't get me wrong, he was a good player, but he was not. There are better tackles. Jackie Slater was a better tackle to him than the guy that really was Gary Zimmerman. People don't know how good that guy was. He was there. Eric Williams, who I played with, if he wouldn't have got injured, and that's not saying anything against Munoz. It's just the reality of it. There were some tackles out there. Joe Jacoby.
He's not in the Hall of Fame, right?
No, these guys are not there.
He's got to be in the Hall of Fame.
That's what I'm saying. These guys were exceptional players. And I'm not saying anything against Munoz, but I played against better than him.
Maybe he just had bad games against you.
I just thought, well, I just saw him, guys, and I'm honest with him. And I saw him. And he had Boomer Esiason, and I thought they were good, but I mean, there were better tackles that I played against. The best tackle I played against was a guy nobody ever talks about, is Mike Kent from Atlanta. That guy was really good.
I remember Mike Kent, sure.
So, and Rick says he's still waiting for Jim Marshall to be put into the senior.
I know,
voting.
but there's some guys. L.C. Greenwood's not in there.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Yeah,
that whole defensive front's got to be in the Hall of Fame, don't they?
I mean, come on, that's not against. I commend him. I think Bryant Young deserves. Fletcher Cox should have the opportunity after what you said about, But what are they doing this on? It takes some of these guys a long time because they didn't get along with the media or they didn't get publicized as long. So Kim Riley is, he never made a Pro Bowl.
Right.
What kind of thing is that? And what is he, one of the all-time interception leaders?
Yeah, isn't interception leaders a mistake, kind of a misnomer anyway, as far as greatness? Because the guys who are really great don't get a lot of interceptions because they don't get thrown at.
Yeah, right? That's true. So, but then you can say that about sacks or anything.
True.
You can do anything.
Yeah.
So, but all right, but doing that, like, what would you consider? Who would you consider the baseline to being a Hall of Famer or not being a Hall of Famer? And let's go with defensive end, just because again, this is
interesting. I would say, as a Hall of Famer, the baseline would have to have been Deacon Jones.
Oh, great call. Yeah.
I mean, that was, and they, in that ESPN poll, they put him as a defensive tackle. And I'm like, are these guys serious? What are they looking at? He was a defensive end.
Yeah.
I mean, they made some things that you got to look at the poll and you have to make your own thing. But Deacon Jones, every player within 2 eras looked at him, and this is what defensive ends are supposed to be. I mean,
so he was an 8-time Pro Bowl. He was on the All 1960s team. He was 5 times All Pro, and over his career had 173 and a half sacks.
I don't even know if that. Do we know that that number is even accurate though? Because it had
That's
to go
my
back
point. Because some people
later.
say that he had over 200 sacks, but you're right. But he was feared.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the game plan him. It's just like Bruce Smith. Bruce Smith was, and I played with Randy White. I played with Ed Too Tall Jones. I've seen Reggie White. Bruce Smith was unbelievable. I had never seen anybody like that in my life. He was playing in a three-man front, and to do what he did was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Reggie White was just a physical. Both of them were physical phenoms. They were just rare. And I've seen Reggie. I've seen him destroy offensive linemen just physically.
I watched him doing the Super Bowl against the Patriots when he was he was at the end of his career. And
Exactly.
He did it. So
Exactly. Reggie, but Bruce Smith was, I had never seen anything like that. And I played against him, but when I played with him, I had never seen anything like that. He was just rare.
Well, and he played for a long time.
Yeah,
But
he did.
when you compare, like when you're talking about Bruce Smith and Deacon Jones, I don't feel like that there's even a comparison. Deacon
Why is
Jones
that?
had 20 plus sacks 4 times in his career. And like at 19, where the most sacks that Bruce Smith ever got. Now I understand that they were playing, one was a 3-4, one was a 4-3, but I mean the most he ever got, he did get 19 sacks one
19.
season, but
But
never
you-
went above.
Yeah, I
15.
played with him when he got that. Do you know why he did that? This is how special it
Because
was.
you were on the line.
No. Bryce Falk, the year before, had won Player of the Year. Bruce went in there and said, hey, and they gave Bryce a raise. And Bruce went in there and said, hey, wait a minute. I am the best player on this team. The general manager told Bruce, said, no, Bryce Falk is, because he was Player of the Year. The next year, Bruce walks out there and gets 19 sacks. Not very many players can do that. And Bruce Smith was one of those players.
And
Trust
of course, he got the Player of the Year.
Yeah. But
And
here's the
but he
thing
wound up
about
getting it
Bruce.
twice.
If Bruce would have played in a four-man front, he would have been unstoppable. He played in the majority of the time, he played in that three-man front. If you put him in the position of the Taylors, the Tippett's, they wouldn't have blocked him out there, and he could do it. He was that athletic.
Yeah,
Morning, guys.
I'm bringing in Robert Butler. I like I said, I was all ready to get the song "Simply Irresistible" to bring him in, but like I said, it was late lawnmower start. Get this up started.
She's so fun. There's no telling where her money went. Yeah,
Exactly.
I rocked that one.
We could just let Robert sing it a cappella. Let's go, Robert.
And when back
I
to
was
what we were
listening
talking about.
backstage, Jim. Marcellus Wiley, Jim, says that Reggie White told Bruce Smith if he played with the kind of players that he played with, that Smith would be a better player. Do you believe that story? You think Marcellus is embellishing a little bit?
He's not in. Bruce would have been great anywhere. Bruce was something. You had to play with him to see how great he was.
Okay.
And that's nothing against Reggie White. You got to remember, he started in the USFL.
Yeah.
And still to do what he did in the NFL is unbelievable. But Reggie was just. Did you know that Reggie could do full splits?
Yes.
People don't know that. But Reggie was these guys were unique talents. And they played so hard. And both of them were just unique talents. You can't take, if you want a baseline, guys like that, that's Hall of Famers.
If you could only take one, Jim, who do you draft?
I'm drafting Bruce Smith.
Okay. Wow.
Wow.
He was
Maybe I have to look back.
He was the overall number one pick.
Mm,
Bruce was.
gotcha.
So it says that there's only been only 60 players that have had over 100 sacks.
Uh-huh.
So I'm this is probably not even a correct question to ask. How far away, where would you say you would rank, Jim? In
I
Hall
know
of Fame?
sacks in the Hall of Fame. If I get in it, it won't be until I can barely walk. but I rank way down there because I saw some players that were just unbelievable. The players I played with, they had Harvey Martins, they had Too Tall Jones, obviously Randy White's in already. And then the players I played against, Reggie White's in, but I saw Jerome Brown at his peak. And that was pretty special.
Yeah.
And I know they had Clyde Simmons on there. They had Mike from Alabama.
Mike Golick.
Mike Pitts.
Mike
Pitts.
Pitts.
Pitts was on that team. But Golick was on that line too at one point.
Yes, he was. I mean,
Yes,
I'm
he
just
was.
trying to pick it. And then they also had great linebackers. I mean, they had Byron
Seth Joyner, Byron Evans.
Joyner. You know, it's just that
all
whole
those guys.
defense was great.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite, it's almost sacrilege to say, is that my favorite number 20 was, Andre Waters. You know, I know that he wasn't necessarily the cleanest player. That's why they called him Dirty Waters. And unfortunately, it was that type of play that may have been the cause of him taking his own life. But he was the guy who kind of defined what a safety was for me. And then of course getting Brian Dawkins. Yeah, Brian Dawkins being a Hall of Famer, obviously much more special of a player, but ultimately it was I learned what a safety was all about from Waters.
Yeah, there's always going to be controversy on who is in and who is out because who is making the decisions on it? That's the question you have to ask.
And that's where because when I think about the sacks, where obviously we're talking, this got started with Bryant Young, and I'm saying, well, wow, he's only had this many sacks, and I understand he was a defensive tackle. Where do you think are some of the differences between a defensive tackle and a defensive end going in? Like when somebody is looking at this, and when I think about it, just the normal casual fan is going to be like, well, that they may watch this show and they say, well, Jim Jeffcoat's got over 100 sacks. Bryant Young didn't even have anywhere near 100. Why is he in and Jim's not?
It's because defensive ends are rated on different things. Howie Long doesn't have over 100 sacks. Did you know that? Everybody knows that he was a dominant player. That's not the question. Sometimes it's things that I don't understand. I can't even sit here and lie to you about how they rank these guys and and what they're doing. Because if you look at defensive ends, the majority of them do have over 100 sacks that are in the Hall of Fame. The majority. You said it was 60. And I'm sure all of them have over 100 sacks.
Well, that there was that they actually, since counting, there's only been 38 players that when they went backwards, like they found Dolph Deacon Jones, somebody went back and went every one of his plays and found out that he's got 178.5 stats. And I'm getting these all from Pro Football Reference.
Yes.
Like somebody's actually gone back and watched all of these plays. That I would say that's probably the most comprehensive statistician for all pro players that's out there in comparison to anything else like ESPN or whatever. Pro Reference just is
I would agree, but I wouldn't think all of Deacon Jones's plays are on film going back into the mid 60s. I wouldn't think all of them are there. So they're missing something.
I don't know. I don't know if they
Plus
are.
the numbers are deflated, Pegs, too, because how many pass attempts were there in games in the 60s? They're half or a third of what they are now. So you don't get that many opportunities.
Well, and especially if you were going up against him and he was getting, anywhere between 19 and 22 sacks a year. I mean, that's a lot of sacks.
Mm-hmm. Plus, get some pretty good teammates taking sacks away from him too. So, right.
I mean, that's they're always going to have that. I mean, think about all the sacks that Reggie White was a second late for by having everybody else there. Like I said, Nick Simmons got 100 sacks. Jerome Brown was
Jerome
taking
Brown.
sacks away. Pitts was taking
Yeah.
sacks away. So you think about all the guys that were, that front four was
Oh, yeah.
ridiculous. Was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And
it's-
then imagine a blitz coming in on that. With those four coming, and then you didn't really have to blitz much, but if you did, you were likely going to get to the quarterback if he didn't get rid of it fast.
Yeah.
So,
I
And I'm
feel
just-
with Jerome coming up so much, I can't believe I haven't brought my little viewer.
Yeah. Robert,
yeah,
get
we
in
talked
there.
about this. We talked about this before, where Jerome Brown, because I see that hat and I think about how Jerome Brown said, before that game, against Penn State, that the Japanese didn't eat with the Americans before they bombed Pearl Harbor, and the kicker from Penn State said, "Yeah," and they lost the war, and of course they did lose that war. There's,
See, my
Joe
brother-in-law played for Penn State on that championship team.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. If you remember the game, because I was at the game, Penn State played with one defensive lineman. They played with all those linebackers.
Yeah.
All Miami had to do was run Alonzo Highsmith, and they would have never stopped them. And they did. That was the biggest mistake for the Miami Hurricanes, was not running, and the players knew it.
I think Vinny just threw another interception just now, actually.
Yeah.
So, but I just, the reason why, and I'm, like I said, because I know that you have over 100 sacks, and I know that, like I said, it was the first thing that popped into my head when I saw that he had only, when Brian only had like 86 sacks. I was like, wow, Jim's got more than sacks than that. I wonder if Jim thinks he should be in the Hall of Fame. And it's not the easiest question to just ask. You'd be like, hey,
but
I feel like you're a Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
but
they have two categories now. Is that it's interesting what they do is obviously they have a category where they take players, and until you're out of the league for I think it's 30-something years, then you go into the legends category, and you're seeing a lot of players are getting put in. And now with the legends, that's how Drew Pearson got in.
Cliff Branch this year, right? Wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a couple, they're putting Art McNally went in, correct? And,
First referee to go in the Hall of Fame, I think.
yeah, and things like that. That's how they're going to do it. And you'll see Everson Walls is up for it, and when you go into the legends, but you have to be out. I think I got 3 more years before I can go into that category.
so you're
Yeah, I
considered
thought
a legend.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Getting up
I
there in
can't believe they
years.
waited that long on Ray Guy. Reading
Yeah.
about him. I mean, he's for my time, but it's a part of the game. Kickers and punters, you
Yeah,
have an award named after you.
I know.
And I think he fell in under that category, right? Ray Guy?
Yeah, but still, somebody put this up. Jim Marshall, come on, man, or L.C. Greenwood,
Yeah.
Harvey Martin. I mean, look at this.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's who is making these decisions? That's what scares you. Who's
Well,
making
it's
them?
not that big guy anymore because he retired.
Yeah,
It's like, and you always looked at, it was always interesting because he would go and let somebody know that they was going to be in the Hall of Fame. And of course, he dwarfed them because that guy was such a monster guy. He's very soft spoken. And I don't even know his name, but he just retired. But he would always dwarf the football player. Yeah, he would always dwarf the football player. And it's like, wow. It's like, maybe, and he didn't even play football, right?
yeah,
He was just he's just the president of the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
yeah. His son did
and-
though. He just retired. Yeah,
So I just find it interesting, and I wonder, like, because we've been getting names on who do we think should be in the Hall of Fame, and who do you think right now is the biggest snub from the Hall of Fame?
Go ahead, Jim.
me.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, the biggest to me is Darren Woodson. I think Darren Woodson has been snubbed in it. I've known Woody, and I know what he can do and did. Now, I can't argue with Leroy Butler because Leroy Butler was a game changer. But I think Woodson should have the opportunity to have that chance to be in there because he was a premier safety even Jimmy Johnson said the biggest mistake he made was not starting Woodson as a rookie. And he was over an extended period of time. He was a top-notch player.
I'll give you two quick names, and I'll back up my my Perth alumni mate, Rick Sherlock. Jim Marshall is one of the biggest snubs, and I'm going to give you a Cowboy, Chuck Howley.
Oh, no question.
Right.
The only player to be a most valuable player on a losing team in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Good catch there.
Yes.
Well,
Chuck
I think
Haley?
more kickers in general. I don't know what it is about. I mean, it's all part of the game. Special teams, field position. I understand you don't want to lower the standards, but you think about who was the returner for the Bears.
Devin Hester.
Yeah,
Yeah.
someone, something like that. One of the best returners of all time.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't play a position, but you have a special teams coach, guys. You know, it's a phase of the game.
I mean, if you're going to go to him, actually the guy who was really before him, the Washington Redskin, Brian Mitchell. He played for the Eagles. I think he only didn't play for the Cowboys, but he played for everybody in the NFC East. and was the eminent kick returner. You know, like he was the guy that, you know, he was the best before Devin Hester. Devin Hester was like watching a human joystick, you know, where, you know,
that guy had
like,
no fear.
Another guy that nobody talks about, I thought had a chance to be a Hall of Famer, is Keith Jackson. I really like Keith Jackson. I've known Keith for years.
Keith Jackson, the tight end.
Yeah.
I mean, the ex-Eagle Keith Jackson. I mean, I
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yes, so I did a couple of years ago. I did the best players to wear the number for the Philadelphia Eagles, because it's, you know, and you know, once you get into the 40s and the 50s, and you know, so, you know, like, I'm not talking the years, I'm talking the numbers. You know, it's hard to figure out who's the best number 40, who's best number 50. But when it came to his number 88, I don't feel like anybody else has worn it better than him. You know, and it's funny because he was probably the first player to respond to that and be like, aha, you know, this guy's right. You know, I was the best player to wear the number. And he was an amazing tight end.
He was. He was a great athlete.
And he was the first one to leave the regime that was created by Norman Brayman and the Eagles.
Went to the Dolphins, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. And he didn't really care to go to Miami, wasn't interested in going to Miami, but did not want to stay in Philadelphia anymore either, because he just saw, unfortunately, that guy, just saying that guy's name still makes me angry, because I can't stand the fact, you know, he was this used car salesman from Florida who wound up buying the Eagles for a song because Leonard Toews was a gambler and needed to just sell the team. And then threatened to move this team everywhere. You know, that there was threats that, we're going to move to Arizona. We're going to move here. We're going to move here. We're going to move to Arizona, and we'll bring Cleveland over to here. And like, he was all this playing and stuff. I mean, it was a big deal when Jeffrey Lurie wound up buying the team, because how much of Norman Brayman was an asshole. Excuse my language, but he was. We're on Roku TV, so they allow us to say some of these words.
Yeah.
But
and we were talking about offensive tackles and Vaselli. There was a guy that was at New England that a lot of people don't know about.
John Hanna.
Well, Hog Hanna's in. Hog was.
Oh no, not in. You're saying right.
Yeah. Brian Holloway was a
great player. He used to come up here to play golf tournaments every year. Great guy too.
Yeah, he's a great guy, but with Brian, it was an all-day work to try to work with him, because he was very physical, highly intelligent, and he understood angles. He understood them. So Holloway's another one that nobody talks about.
Yeah, good one.
White Shoes Johnson.
White shoes worth it?
Billy's in, isn't he?
He's nominated for next year, I believe. He's in the semifinalists or wherever. They have different levels, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if Megan make it would get in because of all his
Off
off-field problems.
Mm.
So I don't think he'll get in.
Yeah, but you know what? How much should that really fall into things? Hey, listen, I'm sure there are a number of not so nice guys that are in the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah,
O.J. Simpson's still there, isn't he?
Is he still in there?
Yeah,
Bro,
yeah.
you're a guy.
Once you're in, they don't take you out, right? Like you don't. You
Charles
don't get to
Haley
lose.
wasn't an immediate darling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he got mad because he wasn't first ballot. Remember, he never showed up to the Hall of Fame.
That's
Terrell
right.
Owens.
Right.
He
He
did
did
this
it
year.
in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Well, and then you had first ballot that didn't even show up just because he was like, no, I ain't showing up, and that's Terrell Owens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what
So-
it is.
But
It's
he
just like-
missed the first ballot, though, I think.
That's right.
He was
He
mad
didn't
because
go
they
first
didn't
ballot.
put him first ballot.
Yeah.
That's
So-
the question I have to ask you guys is on wide receivers. What is the what do you have to do to get in for wide receivers? Because there's some wide receivers that were dominant. Then there were other ones you go, huh?
Well, the game's changed though. It's hard to you can't. People always say Lynn Swan doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Game's so much different now. I think Lynn Swan belongs in the Hall of Fame, right? I mean, but guys who catch just because you catch 90 or 100 passes today, I don't know that makes you a Hall of Famer because everybody's catching that. So
Do you think Larry Fitzgerald would be a Hall of Famer?
I do.
I do too.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Yep.
I mean,
How
Wes
about-
Walker's not. I mean, I don't think
Who's
Wes.
that?
I don't think Wes Walker's a Hall of Famer. Caught a ton of passes, right?
Mhm.
I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, and this will go well with my Patriot brethren, but I don't think Edelman's a Hall of Famer.
No. I did a whole show about that.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, some great playoff runs, a great player, but he doesn't
Yeah.
belong in the Hall of Fame.
Well, so when I think about Hall of Famers, I think of Chris Carter is a Hall of Famer. He's
Yeah.
That would
I-
be
and-
gold for me.
But here's the thing: is Chris Carter was more impactful than Jimmy Smith?
Yes,
You think so?
I think so. Well, maybe. I guess it's. That's a good question, Jim.
Yeah. That is.
And they both had to kind of start over again with other
Exactly.
teams. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the only question because Jimmy Smith, his biggest thing were injuries with the Cowboys. It wasn't talent.
Yeah.
Then when he went to Philly, he had the issues with other things. And then when he went to Jacksonville, he exploded.
Great player. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Chris Carter was a touchdown machine. That's
Yeah.
what happened.
well, that was his MO. I mean,
Yeah.
that was what that's exactly what he said about him. He's like, oh, we got to get rid of him because all he does is catch touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the
that
most
was-
silly comment ever made about an NFL player, isn't it?
But
Yeah.
and it was funny. It was funny, but obviously there was lots of other reasons why he sent him to Minnesota. He was like, listen, you got to, he saved his life. He said it. Said it specifically. He's like, you got to get your life in order, and it can't be here. We can't have you here. And luckily, he had the help in Minnesota to be able to clean up his life.
Oh yeah.
And he always thanked Buddy Ryan for that. He was really forefront about that, saying how Buddy Ryan really saved his life. Because
Mhm.
how do you get rid of a player who just caught 11 touchdowns for
Yeah.
you that
You're right.
previous year? 45 catches, 11 touchdowns, and I think out of the other rest of those catches, most of them were first downs.
Mhm.
So it was like that was all he did was just move the chains and put referees' hands in the air. You know what I mean? And that's
part of the game. So yeah. And I don't know that he's been invited back to the rookie symposium again, has he, Jim, since he made the comment about, always have one guy in your posse to take the fall when you get in trouble.
Yeah. I remember
I think
that.
that was the
Yeah.
best advice to give a bunch of rookies. But
No, I don't
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
I think with Pro Football Focus, I think with sites like that and deeper analytics, the criteria will eventually change.
Yeah.
And you'll know how dominant a player really is. We're talking about defensive ends that didn't get enough sacks and all that stuff. You got to measure double and triple teams, how many times, how the strength of the opponent, what offensive lineman you were going against, and et cetera. how many Pro Bowlers. I mean, a guy like Trent Williams, with the 49ers, or whose responsibility of blocking Aaron Donald in the NFC West, for instance. It's deep and driven, very boring, but somebody's got to do it.
Right.
You're right.
But at least you'll get it right that way. Instead of us fans, we just watch. I can only see so much. We can't see the whole game as a fan. You can't even see where the safeties are half the time. Watch it on TV. Except for maybe Jamie. You go to every game. I definitely put you as a judge for the Philadelphia Eagles Hall of Fame.
Oh, geez. Oh, for the Eagles itself, not for the whole Hall of Fame. They'll be.
I said Philadelphia Eagles Hall of Fame.
Okay, good.
Yeah, just so the Wall of Fame is what you're calling it. Like I could really speak to that pretty well. You know what, and that's but I could probably do the entire NFC East.
Okay.
Because I would say out of everything, and I've always been a terrible fantasy football player. So it has not been my thing, specifically because it's hard to keep track of everybody else. So like when it comes to drafting, I've learned that it's so much easier for me to let the computer pick the best available for the first 5 to 6, 7 rounds, because after the 7th round, there's a whole bunch of tight ends, and that if you let the computer pick it, you'll wind up with a team full of tight ends, because after that, the tight ends always rank highest because nobody cares to take more than 1 or 2 of them. But I am terrible at fantasy football because I'm not paying attention to everybody else's team. I do pay attention to the NFC East more than anything else. And then you have the fringe, the guys that get announced all the time, but that's why me personally, I think I could speak only well enough about the NFC East in comparison to, that's why they probably don't give me a vote for the Hall of Fame yet.
Yeah,
we're working on it though. We're working on that. But realistically, if I had to think about this, knowing now, like obviously I knew who you were, Jim, back in the day. But being able to work with you, I have then, I geeked out on you some. I'm not afraid to say like, hey, I'm going to find out more about this guy's career. I want to dive deeper to find out like who he really was and how he really played, so that I can maybe understand and ask some of these questions a little differently when talking to you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that you were a pretty strong, dominant player for a window of time where I think maybe it had something to do with the guys that you were playing with. But for 3, 4, 5 years, you were one of the best at your position.
And the thing that hurt me, and it's always going to hurt me, was we were transitioning at the Cowboys in the 80s. They had become a different team. In the 90s, it was a different team. But the 80s, because the majority of my career was played in the 80s. So that's what hurts.
Yeah.
If I had started in the early 90s, it would have been totally different. But I started in 83. So that made it, and then that's just the reality of it. That's just unfortunate, but that's the reality. And I did play with Randy White. I played with Too Tall Jones. My first year, I played with Harvey Martin. I played with John Dutton. And I played with some, but they were in the latter parts of their career too. And that makes a difference. Where
Jamie, go ahead. I'm just wondering, who's the best pass rusher in the NFC East?
Right now?
No, you or Jamie, yeah.
I'll let you go first,
see everybody. Who?
I let Jim go first here with this.
Go ahead, Jim.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Right now, I would say, you got some pretty you would have to say Parsons, right?
Who's it?
Michael Parsons right now.
Well, and that's just the best guy to get to the quarterback. I mean, I guess if you're putting linebackers in the mix with that.
Yeah.
Well, if you say
pass rusher,
a pure defensive lineman, who would you say? DeMarcus Lawrence has had a consistent. I'm thinking. I like the Washington.
Chase Young,
Washington Commanders or whatever. Fletcher Jenkins. I mean, there's some guys. I mean, that can get consistent on a consistent basis. I don't know who you would say. is the best one in the
Yeah,
NFC.
yeah, and I would say out of all the moments of time that the NFC East has been around, this may be the weakest class of rushers.
I would agree.
That there has been so many great ones, and that if defense wins championships, which is why the NFC East has the most
agree.
Super Bowls than any other team. Now, interestingly enough, it was like more of our offense that won the Eagles their Super Bowl. However, it was a defensive play that made the difference in the game. So the one little bit of defense that happened in that game was the deciding factor, because again, that game still is the highest, the most points I think there was, and the most amount of yards ever in any game, regular season or playoff ever. So there's a lot to be said, but I think that this is a very weak class in the grand scheme of things, that the NFC East is not the strongest in that department right now. We're going to see a little bit of a difference to that, because Washington with all their first round picks has never really played together in a proper way. And now you've got Jordan Davis is going to be an absolute monster. And as long as he can stay healthy, and that's going to be the big thing, because when you're that big and you're that fast, you got to think things are going to start to break down maybe a little bit fast.
History in the NFL says there's going to be question marks, because just what you said, the size.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. So
that is always, history says that. And I'm not saying the kid is talented and he does play hard. I was watching the Hall of Fame game in the Trayvon Walker, and he was really he's going to be a good player. And I'm not saying he isn't, but history says those big guys struggle at some point in their career. And I don't know if it's size or just getting used to the game.
Well, I understand. Hey, listen, we're going to say goodbye to Keith, because he's got his own show to do. He's been running out of here. With 5 minutes to spare, so he can get his own show started. So, Keith, thank you for stopping in and saying hello. And I'll see you tomorrow morning, as long as I can get up.
Well, I'm there at 6, and Pags will get in there when he gets in there, but he's usually on.
All right.
Get that pass. Lately I've been getting up early in the morning is tough when they're burning the candle at both ends. So,
all right, guys, have a great Sunday.
All right, you too, man.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
The NFL, the ruling came down with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
And it was 6 games. The NFL is fighting this. The NFL Players Association is obviously making an appeal too. Now they're saying that Deshaun Watson might play the first game. There's a possibility of it. What is your feelings on what's going on? Because now it is a fire. It's a brush fire now.
Yeah. I was listening to Jason Whitlock earlier this week, and he made a good point. He thinks, it's a pretty good theory, that maybe the NFL was trying to because, a lot of bad backlash came about that 6-game suspension. That wasn't enough. He thinks that the NFL is trying to save face and say, okay, we done it and we've appealed it. So we want female audience to be appeased. And, you guys noticed that Roger Goodell's not going to hear the appeal. He passed it on to another, I don't know who it was, arbitrator with the
Attorney
NFL.
General of the ex-Attorney General of New Jersey.
Yes. So he's taking himself out. So that makes me think maybe they'll keep this thing at 6 games. Mm-hmm. But if they drag this out, my opinion, like we've talked about before, I think this is just dragging out dirty laundry. This is a bad precedent. This was a retired female former federal court judge. This is not some arbitrator that nobody's never heard of. Yes. This is a retired judge who heard the actual evidence here. And I'm okay with 6 games because Deshaun Watson, when the first one came about, he probably had to have known, hey, you know what? Some of those other 66 massage appointments that I made may have been, there's some sketchiness that went on there. Maybe I need to settle this thing and not cause the blackout for the NFL. So I'm, like we talked about before, I'm totally okay with the 6 games.
But here's the problem I ask is, wasn't this the same situation that Robert Kraft was in?
Similar.
And he never
that was more consensual, right? But illegal.
Yeah.
And actually, Robert Kraft did not get caught in an act or get reported. He got caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. He wound up being on location when the sting happened. So that's that
happy ending.
He wasn't in the middle of it. They didn't catch anybody with
right
anything.
Right, wrong is wrong.
I know, and I understand. It's like that was listen, it was all assumed. That was all assumed that it happens. It's and we know better. We know better. In this case, that there was fire where the smoke was.
Exactly.
But the truth of the matter is that he was not. They weren't suing Robert Kraft because he asked for one.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? He was on location when the cops said, "Hey, we're busting you guys." Oh, Mr. Kraft, please step over here. You know what I mean? That's kind of how that all occurred.
Yeah. So, and what fascinates me about this whole situation is Deshaun Watson, the grand juries wouldn't prosecute him. 2.
And
I don't know what happened. I'm not defending them. 2 wouldn't. Right. So there's some kind of sketchy stuff going on. The next thing is that there have been issues with owners. Obviously, we know about Robert, but also Snyder, also Cleveland. All these have had issues, and Snyder's the only one that was suspended for a year, if you remember, that he couldn't run it. His wife was running the team. And I'm just questioning, is 2 different standards on players and coaches. Owners.
And technically, guys, it's supposed to be a higher standard for owners. And there is an argument for the Robert Kraft thing, even though, technically, if we want to get very technical, he was technically charged. Those technically were dropped. Deshaun Watson was technically not charged criminally.
Exactly.
And he was sued. You could sue anybody for anything. This was essentially one lawsuit, and his lawyer, in which he has a good his lawyer, God, what's this guy's name? Rusty Harding.
Oh, Rusty Harding. That's the
Yeah,
he represented Rusty Harding represented Roger Clemens.
That guy just has a bad name with this whole situation. He's just got the bad name. And then on top of this, just to make it apropos that they're having the massage convention literally 2 blocks away from the stadium. Talk about his and that's and only because the convention center is 2 blocks away from the stadium. That's the only reason why that it happens to be in the same spot. Because that obviously I know all about this because they just had the draft there, and you had to sign in because of COVID restrictions. You had to sign in the convention hall to go to the draft, and they had it a couple blocks away. So I know exactly how many steps it is from where they are to where that is, and I got to imagine that it's it's just irony.
But Harding, I was going to say he makes a good point, guys, that this seems like a recruitment. By the way, this case was shot to multiple lawyers prior to the Bugsby, the plaintiff's lawyers coming to this. This is stuff you're not going to hear on regular TV sports talk shows. You may be able to get it here. Obviously, we're getting it right now. So you have to look at it. These salaries are made public, and there was no, and I did a little research on this. There was no police report prior to the civil suit being, and then guys like me, I'm like, where's the police report here?
Exactly.
Then you have 4 police reports after the civil suit started mounting up. So it sounds like a recruitment, not saying it was a recruitment, but I think Rusty Harding did make a good point that this sounds like some type of recruitment. Hey, you want to get a big settlement here? Did you give this guy a massage? Yada, yada, yada. Yeah. and this judge, guys, she took the 4 or 5 cases with the most possible, and air quotes, possible evidence of text messages. She didn't take the least. She's like, no, I took the most evidence.
Yeah.
There's no other evidence. So, and then she came up with 6 games. So I'm totally okay with this, contrary of what the majority of the public may think.
Yeah. And it's not we're condoning of behavior.
No, of course not.
But we're looking at it. Reality is that we don't know. Why would it not go to a grand jury? 2 grand juries.
2 different jurisdictions, yeah.
Yeah, and 2 different jurisdictions. There's something going on that we don't, like you said. You explained some of the issues with it.
Yeah.
Well,
these are all the facts,
they
not
started
just
paying
part of it.
everybody off. They started
Right.
they started to give out the money. That's what it came down to. They started to give out the money, and then with the money comes the, hey, you can't say a word about it. You get the money.
Those
you don't-
NDAs, non-disclosure agreement.
Right. So, and that's what's really going on.
Yeah.
I feel that the NFL does have to set some type of precedent here, and that 6 games, and that's what happened. What I think with this judge is that the judge took into account everybody else that was ever charged with anything before him, and said, okay, I'm just going to hold serve with this and say it that way, where I feel that there should be some type of difference now, that they have to increase these and they have to start setting the precedent. They can't just allow 6 games to be the thing all the time. So I feel that's why I feel like if they were smart here, that they would maybe increase it 2 games, but then say, hey, listen, we're going to suspend you for 25 games, retroactive to the last game that you actually played.
Well, here's what.
Fine him the money
Yeah.
for that time so that he would lose last year's salary.
But he didn't. He couldn't play last year. They wouldn't allow him. But here's my problem with the whole thing, and what kind of disturbed me. Ben Roethlisberger comes out and said that they should never let him play again. Well, Ben Roethlisberger, if you correct me if I'm wrong,
So he's the worst guy to say a word. He should have kept his mouth shut.
He should have kept his mouth. And Robert Kraft said this is a black mark against the NFL.
Oh.
And he said that. And these 2 guys had issues.
Yeah.
Like you said, Robert, we don't know the whole story. There is something going on. And I'm not defending Deshaun Watson. But I also know there's more to this story than we'll probably ever know.
Well,
Guys,
that's why Goodell makes all the
Jamie.
money. I'm sorry. That's why Goodell makes all the money. He knows where everybody is buried.
That's my point.
And to keep this in the news cycle, okay, this is a bad black eye for the league to be holier than thou. Start dragging this stuff out. This is bad for the league. Let me bring this up to you guys. Not to beat a dead horse here. Joe Mixon, the running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, he broke a woman's jaw in 4 places. The video's on YouTube. Why was he drafted and not suspended? We say, well, that happened in college. Well, it looked worse than Ray Rice, okay? That girl did not get a jaw broken in 4 places. She got knocked out, but this woman had her jaw broken in 4 places. This guy played on the biggest stage in the NFL, okay? So if you want to play holier than thou NFL, why did any of the 32 teams draft him? So let's not play that role here. So we know what the NFL is really about, saving the shield and keeping bad news off the shield. So why drag this thing out when people like me know the truth? We follow this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So just let it be. And say, well, let's let the authorities handle this. We have a set of rules, and I do believe if you get caught PEDs. So these are precedent rules. We're not going to start reinventing the wheel and, air quote, doing our own investigation. Because what that does is it keeps your Adam Scheffners, your M. Rappaports talking about this constantly instead of us talking about the Eagles like we should be, or the Dallas Cowboys and the Rams and Super Bowl stuff. Yeah,
exactly. But Tyreek Hill was the same issue in college. if
Yes.
you remember correctly.
And he had to change schools or something. Yeah.
Yeah, he was at Oklahoma State, and he had to, I think it was South Alabama or somewhere he
Yeah.
went to finish up. So, and I'm not, like I said, I look at this, and you're right.
Yeah.
Don't do it one way for this guy and do it another way for another guy. I mean, that's the things that you have to look
Right.
at. You have to look at the whole. And I know it's probably not realistic, but that's the problem I have with the NFL right now is how they make rules as they go along.
Right. There's no precedent, guys. They're trying to air quote get more women,
Yes.
but you got Joe Mixon there.
Yeah, Joe Mixon.
Get drafted by a team. Ray Rice was never picked up by anybody after that incident.
Yes, Ray Rice.
So
yeah.
a few years later, Joe Mixon is playing in that. So
You're right too, and it's on YouTube. You can look it up on YouTube.
Guys, I looked this up Tuesday before I started my program, and I'm thinking it's still there. It's still there. Now, he was suspended for a year at Oklahoma. Jim, he did come back, and I forget. Bob Stoops suspended him. And I believe in forgiveness, but I'm just saying, just be precedent about it. Just don't keep this stuff in the news. That's all I'm saying.
See, when we were, and I hate to say this, but when I was coaching at San Jose State, Mixon is from Northern California.
Okay.
And there were other issues because he grew up in an orphanage.
Okay.
And there were a lot of issues, and people were saying you can't touch this kid because he's got some serious issues. And that's the thing, and that's unfortunate because he was a good player. He was a good player in Northern California.
Yeah.
But a lot of teams, there were a lot of red flags.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it's a shame because this is not just football.
No,
this goes across all sports.
Yeah.
You're right.
And I'm a firm believer that athletes, especially athletes of today, are held to such a different standard and different way of doing things. Their lives are so much different than ours, yet they are confined by the same rules that we have to abide by. And again, this is where I talk about how fast we're all driving. Normal people, Robert and I, are driving maybe 100 miles an hour doing our thing, or we're in our lane. These guys are driving 1,000, 1,000,000 miles an hour. Yeah. So when you have an accident driving that fast, the wreckage is monumental.
Yes, because you saw it happen in LA this week. They were going 85 on a 40, and they killed 6 people.
Yeah, and that was a nurse.
But you're right.
For example.
And so, and I'm just using that as a metaphor.
No, but you're right.
We're talking about life in general. So when these football players, like I said, Ray Rice, obviously everything that happened there, you could tell like she was pushing. He snapped for the half a second and knocked her out, and that was the end of his career, of his life as he knew it at that moment. Because now he was never going to get picked back up again. That video showed too much, got out there too quickly, and there was no way of being able to handle that. See, the good thing about Deshaun Watson is that there's no video. Nobody can see any of this happening. Because I tell you, if they saw this happening, if there was a camera on him at any moment of this, they would absolutely. Right. This would not get swept under the rug. This would become, forefront for everybody. Everybody, every woman that does those types of massages would be under scrutiny. Long term on that, along with anybody who's ever gotten one. And I got to imagine if we're talking about happy endings, there's probably not going to be an NFL or an MLB or anything anymore because I got to imagine this is not just Deshaun Watson's situation, that this is everybody all together. I mean, think about just some of the backlash that came when Brett Favre sent a picture to the
he worked with the team there. And the thing about it is I think the NFL should be swift about this, have a precedent. I think they're going in the right direction by getting Goodell out of the judge, jury, and executioner. That's a step. That's a step, but don't try to override. Hopefully, this is an isolated incident where the NFL says, well, we don't think it's this, that. We're going to step in anyways. Well, if you get a retired federal court judge, just get it out of the news. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's holier than thou, not even Roger Goodell. Personally, not to get too caught up into this, but I went back and read what he said about Adrian Peterson. And I agree with Rusty Hardin. He said, who the bleep does he think he is, writing a letter like he is a judge in a criminal court to Adrian Peterson? And that goes public. He looked like the ref and the referee in a basketball game, calling fouls just to get camera time. That's the perception of Roger Goodell.
Yes, I agree.
So, and that's why I feel like that they have the one opportunity to be kind of swift with this. And like I said, obviously he didn't play last year. So you could retroactive a 25-game suspension. That means they would only really be adding 2 games, but you want to fine him. That's really the big deal here. Fine him for last year's salary.
I agree.
That's really all you're trying to do. You want to hit him where it's going to hurt at most, in the pocket. You know, he's got a big contract. It's not like he's going to be broke when you hit him with this fine. You know what I mean? But I feel that by doing this precedent, by making it a retroactive 25 games, in theory, now you've just suspended him 25 games, even though realistically he's only out for 8.
Yes.
But now the next person that has a situation like this, you have that precedent of 25 games. And that's all that you're really looking for. You're looking to set the precedent for future issues, not for what he necessarily did. He could be the poster child, and it's going to cost him some money here, as it should. Not just to the women. Yes, he should get fined by the NFL. And I feel like a $22 million fine is a hefty enough fine to appease everybody that could be affected necessarily by whatever it was that's going on. Besides
He
the fact
supposedly guys set out last year because he didn't want to play for Houston anymore. And I understand that. And we've talked about this before, Jim. Go ahead and fine him a large amount of money for those extra games. And then maybe fining 2 games is still suspending for 6.
Yes.
You're fining 2 game checks with that other money you just said, Jamie. That would set the precedent, because quite frankly, it sounds like, guys, not to like, you can laugh at me all you want to. Sounds like the guy's got a problem. Sounds like you get 66 different therapists. You probably got a problem. Ask Tiger Woods.
You're right.
Ask Chris Rock. He actually talked about a porn addiction in his stand-up comedy thing. So
Phil Mickelson.
Phil Mickelson had a gambling. Does he have a sex problem too?
No, he's a gambling problem, but it's still an addiction.
It's still an addiction, just like the alcohol and drug abuse program. So
that's exactly right. Maybe
get him to go to some type of therapy for that, and maybe he's already doing that.
Yeah. I'm sure they're recommending that he gets that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's also the part here that they want to league introduce, or like, hey, you have this issue.
Yeah.
We need to get you counseling for this.
Yeah. Yes.
And the NFL wants to be in charge of that.
Yes.
I feel, again, that's part of this, that, I feel like the fine is part of this. The games, the length of the games are part of this, and that the help required, because let's face it, we know about drug and alcohol problems and addictions. We know about gambling addictions. Sex addictions are kind of looked at as funny. And I'm not saying funny, haha. It's funny. It's just not really thought about like that. It's like, hey, I have addiction to eating Cheerios. Well, that's not really hurting anybody, but anything is too much is bad. You know what I mean? And that's what this falls into. You just don't look at it as much like, hey, I'm a sex addict. Well, guys, it's just that machismo thing about you that it's like, okay, well, yeah, good for you that you're a sex addict. It's not really the case, though. That really isn't the case, and there are people that are affected in the process of this.
You're right.
And there's there's been studies done with these smartphones coming out. That's turning into a real thing now. People don't like to talk about it. People really kind of mock gambling addiction at the beginning. It's like, oh, gambling, it's gambling. It's not drugs or alcohol. No, gambling's bad.
You're
you
right.
can be, So.
Well, we solved some of the world's problems. Let's
hey, man.
move on to other things. But let's. Hey,
yeah.
How's Tennessee in their training camp? How's that?
They're looking good. Traylon Burks looks good. Robert Woods, I haven't read anything that he's not practicing. Mm-hmm. So I do think the Titans are they've got a good camp here. Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I saw that.
Got rookies in there playing well. A lot of that is we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's training camp. Everybody claims to be doing well in training camp, other than Matt Stafford with that tendonitis. But they said he did okay yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the biggest training camp story, other than Sam Darnold.
Well, interesting. I think the Broncos are, because they talk about the Cowboys, but the Broncos having a lot of issues with their receiving core. The injury.
Well, they had an injury just now.
Another one,
receiver,
Yeah, so they're having some issues with their receiving core. I tell you, the team that's going to be interesting is Minnesota. I keep telling you this, and I'm not a Minnesota, but I think they have some talent, and I think they have some depth. Justin Jefferson, and they never talk about Thielen, but he's a tremendous player. Obviously, we know that Kirk Cousins is a coach killer.
Yeah,
but if they can keep him just consistent, and they have a running game, Minnesota can make. I don't think they're as good as Green Bay, but they can put a little fear in the Green Bay.
It's a heck of a story, but we're going to figure out how good. And I think Aaron Rodgers with this psychedelic story that these drugs are.
Did you hear that?
NFL going to be checking him out.
Yeah.
For, drugs and stuff.
Hey, but that is not a banned substance. It's not even an illegal substance.
No, it isn't. But
he's going to be forced to work with these young receivers, and I think he's one of those guys. If he's not forced to do it, he's not going to do it. Well, this year he's going to be forced to work with other receivers not named Devontae Adams.
Yeah.
Well, he's already anointed that his new receiver is going to be a Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer, yeah. He did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I look at that as the same thing as like Tyreek Hill talking about how his quarterback is better than Patrick Mahomes. I'm like, come on now, let's be for real, and that's all bap. I understand that. I find it all very amusing, and I don't trust Minnesota specifically because they have Kirk Cousins. And until Kirk Cousins can actually win games where he's high profile, Monday Night Football is going to tell big story again. And of course, it's against the Eagles.
And that's true. Here's the thing. Even the new general manager called Cousins out and said, we know what we have. We have to make sure that we control. And that's true with Cousins. You cannot put him in situations. You have to bring the game plan. You know what type of player he is. And I think they understand that. This is probably said, hey, we can't put him in situations where he can hurt us because, we'll all be gone because that's his MO.
Yeah.
And has their defense really gotten that much better? That's really where I feel like that they need to stop other offenses, and that's the problem. Like everybody's talking about the offense of the Vikings and that how they're going to be so much better this year because Jefferson is in, like he's now grown into his body, we'll say, and he's even able to. He's going to be that type of wide receiver that could be top 5, if not top 3 in the league.
Mm-hmm. I think
health-wise, still stop somebody.
They're going to be better. If they're healthy, and which you haven't heard anything about injuries, I think that's what really hurt Minnesota is the health of their defense, because they do have some really good players on that defense.
Yeah, Patrick Peterson's an older player. So that's the thing. Are you dependent on guys in their 30s
That is always
to stay healthy for 17 games?
That's
They were
the
ranked
problem.
in the 20th last year.
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins is taking over $30 million from the
But
Cowboys.
Robert saying that is, if you remember, 2 years ago, Tennessee was ranked low. Last year, they were ranked high, if you remember. And they come just a little tweaks there, here and there help.
That's true. That's true.
So that's what I'm thinking is going to happen with Minnesota. Will they be a top 10 defense? I don't think so. But I would think they would be a top 15 defense.
And continuing to talk about Tennessee, just very, very quickly, how close is the quarterback competition? I've actually heard that it's a lot closer than people actually were suspecting from the kid from Liberty, that the kid from Liberty is actually having a really good camp. And it's, if it wasn't already kind of set in stone that he was going to be the backup, that this competition would be a lot tougher, to call.
Yeah, it's hard to see. Is that optimism talk? Are you talking up your rookie versus is he really making those big throws? I watched him last year, man, and he at Liberty, he fails to make reads. His second year, a lot of people blame the Liberty offensive line and all that. I'm just not sure that's the case. I hope it's the case. Because if that is, that he may help Tennessee win a playoff game. Ron Tannehill's 0-2 in his last 2 playoff games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really hoping that's the case. My thoughts are we're going to have to see him play in the preseason. I'm going to have to see him throw people open to make that assumption.
Yeah. And speaking of something that's I'm asking myself why, is Pete Carroll obviously was saying that he's going to go with Geno Smith over Drew Lock, but they said that they had a mock game and Lock was better than Smith. And I'm thinking to myself, regardless of what quarterback you pick, you're not going to be very good. That's just to be honest. It's Seattle. You're not going to be very good. He
don't want to pull a Stephen Ross, I think they want Bryce Young from Alabama. And they're going to have to lose about 14 games to get him. Yeah, that's my guess. Getting rid of Bobby Wagner.
And another one, they might get – and Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be out of San Francisco. We all know that. And they might cut Jimmy the way they're sounding.
I tell you what, guys, Pickles, if you're still out there, brought it up on my show the other day. The Saints, guys, they won 8 games with 4 quarterbacks last year. Jimmy Garoppolo in a Saints uniform, when you have an injured Jameis Winston, we don't know how good he's going to be. Wow. You have Andy Dalton. Can you imagine possibly a Jimmy Garoppolo?
I never thought about that.
How about that, Jamie, huh?
How about that?
Yeah, I think that right now the Saints are in such a rebuild that they're not going to be able to, like, even with Jimmy, that what I look at with Jimmy is that he is a great game manager. That it's with Jimmy, I look at him kind of like David Carr was. He was just able to hold serve and let the rest of the team win the game. That's kind of how I look at that. And that's how Jimmy was able to do really well, because that defense was able to win a lot of games for the 49ers. Specifically for the beginning of the season when they beat the Eagles. It was the defense that won, not the offense. So, and that's how the 49ers are going to be able to operate again this year, because I don't think their quarterback now, Jimmy G or otherwise, Trey Lance, is not good enough to really move that offense with any worthwhile. I mean, they've got Deebo Samuel, and as Deebo goes, that's how the 49ers offense goes. It has nothing to do with the quarterback, has nothing to do with anybody else. It all has to do with him. So if he gets the ball 50% of the time, they're going to get some yardage. But short of that, I don't think that it's going to matter who's handing him the ball or pitching him the ball.
See, and I'm with Robert. If Jimmy G goes to New Orleans, I don't think New Orleans is that, because they got the running back. Thomas is doing the 11 on 11.
Yeah, but Kamara is in trouble.
He is, but there's nothing been said yet. It's
Well,
kind of
that's-
they kept that, right?
Yeah, there's some. It was
Now,
mentioned in there. He's got to deal with this year. It's not something that's going to be waiting.
But they
So-
do have some offensive talent to put around Jimmy G, and defensively, they're better than you think they are. And
Yes,
I
they're
agree.
good guys. I mean,
Yeah.
they haven't lost
No, I
anybody.
agree.
Jamie.
I don't think they're rebuilding. I think they got to find the right guy behind the center. That's the problem they have, and it might not be the quarterback they have now, Jameson.
Well, and Taysom Hill's hurt, but I don't look at Taysom Hill as the guy. I look at Taysom Hill as just more like a, one of those wildcat quarterbacks or scat back type. That's just what have you. I don't know. I don't trust in the Saints right now. I know that they I think they went 8-9 last year, so they were around 500. But when I saw them up against the Eagles and they had a winning record at the time, because everybody said that the Eagles didn't beat anybody with a winning record. That wasn't the case. The Saints had a winning record when they came into Philly, and they left with a losing record in the process. So, well, not with they wound up 500 after that. So, I kind of look at the whole thing, and it was just like, they just didn't see that their defense came to play. I just don't see them ready to go. I feel like that they do well at home because that dome is really tough to play in, and that the Saints fans are very similar to Eagles fans in terms of their passion for their team. And when you have that in a enclosed space, it's a tough place to play. Like that's why that dome is a tough place to play. I'd rather play in Atlanta in the dome there than I'd ever want to play in New Orleans, just because the fans in Atlanta are weak in comparison to the New Orleans fans. And I'm not doing it as a dig to Atlanta fans. I'm doing it more as I am more in tune with the New Orleans fans, just because I know how raucous they can be, how loud they can be, and how that home field advantage works. So
they shut Tampa out at home last year, guys.
Well, they've had Tampa's number for 3 years.
Yeah, I'm not with Pags on this.
I had to throw that up for the audience. They shut Brady out at home. That you got to.
Anybody can shut the GOAT out. It's got to be something's right.
Yeah, I look at them.
They swept them. They swept them
for 2 years now. I mean, I don't think Tom Brady has beaten New Orleans in a Tampa uniform.
In a regular season, they won in the playoffs.
They won the playoff game. That was the one thing, So, but ultimately that I see that's he's just got that fog. I think it's the same thing with Miami. How did Miami beat New England all those times? I think he would just get the fog. He doesn't like to play in certain places. Maybe the noise gets to him, because he's old now. He's got to turn down the hearing aid so he can't hear as well, things like that. Maybe that has something to do with it. But I mean, I don't.
Good. Like my
I
dad
don't trust.
You get old by being a fool.
I just don't think New Orleans has got the talent really on both sides of the ball, especially now that Kamara is probably not he's going to have some serious problems. I don't know that he's going to be able to play this year.
Now Ingram will be Ingram, and I don't think he's an answer, but for a couple of games he'll help.
Yeah.
Ingram.
So, but we'll see. I mean, I mean, obviously, it's all talk until we actually get on the field and see how things really occur. It's great until week 1. You know what I mean? I feel that the way that everybody plays preseason games anymore is that the first 4 games of the season are really the preseason.
Right.
So that's where you got to catch up to speed because nobody's playing their starters anymore. These games have now become, let's figure out who our 53-man roster is. We got to get those last 8 spots. The lines have to play because you want that muscle memory and you need them to get their strength up in that regard. But you're not. I mean, you're so afraid of somebody getting hurt anymore and such a meaningless game that you don't want them to play. And I kind of agree with that. It's like you got to be able to keep them lucid. I mean, even the Eagles coach said that they're not tackling to the ground, which means that they're going to have some type of issues with tackling in the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Hey, Robert's got to run. So I don't
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I know that we kept him here for a long time. I
Yeah, we
appreciate
did.
Robert.
Thank you,
Next week we will definitely have your intro music ready and available. I'm gonna have the dancing girls on both sides
Yeah.
of you. Yeah.
Hey
'cause
guys, tell Mac I'm thinking about him and Linda, and to get well, whatever he's dealing with. We're thinking about the family here. I am.
All right.
Absolutely, absolutely, and just to let everybody know, Mac is doing well. So I have spoken to everybody. I have spoken to him. He is doing well. We're hoping that he gets back very, very soon. So,
Good. Good.
but
Thanks,
I will
guys. Have a
definitely
good
pass that
show.
along. You
All
do
right,
the
thanks,
same.
buddy.
You have a great
All right,
weekend.
brother.
Hey, Pax, I got a question for you.
Let's
And
go.
I know we always talk about Eagles and Cowboys, but Carolina, right now, obviously Darnold and Mayfield are in the battle. The head coach, who was at Temple, Matt Rule, said that he's not going to make a decision on the starting quarterback until after the second preseason game. And you just made a comment that, and I agree with you on this, is that really preseason, we have 3 preseason games, but you're gonna, in the early part of the season, just what you said, the tackling, the speed of the game is going to last about 3 or 4 games. What is your opinion on what's going on now? Here's an interesting thing too, is they're managing, like basketball, they're managing the load of Christian McCaffrey to try to keep him healthy. What is your opinions on these things?
So obviously, they definitely need to be able to not be so dependent on McCaffrey. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's unfortunately just having him on the field a lot of the time dictates how the play goes.
Yeah.
So you need to have him on the field, because when he's not on the field, then you could just tee off on the receivers, because they don't have another running back to be able to even go to. So they have to do more. I think that they're going to have to uh, lessen the offense to these run play options,
Yes.
where they're just showing the option of McCaffrey running, but
Yes.
not really doing it. You know what I mean? That they're going to have to do more passing. And I think because of that, specifically because of that, that you're going to wind up seeing Baker Mayfield win this spot.
Yes.
I feel that he's doing this to last year. I mean, was his rookie year in the NFL. I'm talking to coach. You know, that Rule came in here and he was criticized a lot, and they were thought, maybe is this a one and done type of thing? He's probably more of a college coach than a pro coach, and you got to get used to the league. Every league is different, and you've just dealt with a lot of kids, in college, where you have all of these players available to you, and the next man up is easy to find when you have 8 to choose from. When you don't have that many to choose from, it becomes a lot harder to do that. And I think that that's part of the challenge of moving from college to pro as a coach.
Yeah.
That you lose the opportunity of having everybody there in the room saying, "Hey, put me in, coach. I run a play." And and all of the money that these colleges spend on these analysts to help out the coaches.
Now, yeah.
But, the big thing with Alabama is that they paying millions of dollars on analysts to even just help the coaches.
Yeah. Only thing I was going to say about it is, we know, just Robert mentioned this earlier in there about the injuries in a 7-game season, in just 17 game this season. And the likelihood of McCaffrey, regardless of how they load manage him, he's going to get hurt, because he's a small guy. At Stanford, he did a lot of good things, and he got hurt there. It's size. I mean, he's getting hit, and he's not a big guy. They have to have somebody who can spell and play. And I know they took the guy, Chuba Hubbard, from Oklahoma State last year, but they're going to have somebody. And I agree with you on Mayfield. I think Mayfield will probably be the starter. I think.
I agree, and as Pickles is saying here, that Rule's trying to motivate Mayfield. These guys see how each other is doing in practice.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that they're that close.
Yeah.
It's like and, Sam Darnold. I'm sure he's an okay player. He's
Yeah.
probably a better quarterback than I am.
Mhm.
Which is not saying much. It's and I know that that's said more in jest. But
Yeah.
truth of the matter is that when I think of Baker Mayfield and I think of Sam Darnold, I don't put them in the same category. I
Yeah.
put Baker Mayfield above Sam Darnold in every stretch.
But
So
yeah. And I agree with you. Here's the the history of Mayfield at Texas Tech. He was the starter. He got hurt. They put Mahomes in, and basically Mahomes became, he was a phenom. And he wanted to transfer to Oklahoma, and they fought it for a year, Texas Tech, because they wouldn't just let him. They let him transfer, but he had to sit out a year, and Tech could have stopped that. And then he's always had a chip on his shoulder. And now, the things that happened in Cleveland, good, bad, or indifference, some of that was wrong. That was really bad management by the head coach dealing with a player. That's just my opinion. I mean,
across the board. And I feel like even their coaching was so poor last year in general that and that it all got blamed on Baker.
Yep, I agree.
So
and I'm not saying that. And I agree with you in all things. I think Mayfield is a quarterback that can win games. He's proved it. He was one play away from going to the championship game. And I think if you put him in the right situation, he can manage games. But you got to have people around him. He doesn't have Nick Chubb's.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when it comes to that one play, that he missed out on, really, he was one play away. Truth of the matter is that if it was a better play, they may have won that game.
That is true.
You know what I mean? So they didn't really put the ball in his hands properly, or they didn't set him up to succeed in a way that could. So I think that Baker has got it in him.
Yeah.
Is it able to come out all the time? I can't answer those questions. That's the hard part with this. Is it Baker, or is it everything else? And they use Baker as the scapegoat.
Exactly.
And I feel that
you look at it in our lifetime, how many successful quarterbacks have been at the Cleveland Browns? Only one I can remember is Bernie Kosar, and before him there were, but other than that,
but Bernie Kosar and Bernie Kosar was a great quarterback who, again, wound up in the situation that he had as an adversary, John Elway, and John Elway won those games.
Yeah.
But really, it wasn't Bernie that was losing those games. It was the defense of Cleveland that just they got what I call the hiney hole pucker. They started to squeeze. They started to squeeze at the end of games because Cleveland were up in some of those games.
Yes.
And most of those games, in fact. And then as Elway would just come down, and he was able to legendize himself from coming back and winning those games. Where the drive, you know what I mean? That's you still see that all the time. It's just how he was able to just come down the field and score that touchdown, which won that game, and put it in their heads. And then, like I said, Cleveland, because Cleveland was perennial playoff contender.
Yes.
Always getting up close. Yeah. And, then ultimately they just would lose in the championship game. And then it became the Jets. The Jets kind of did the same thing with butt fumble.
Yeah.
You're right. They get it in their head. They can get to that point, but they couldn't ever cross the hump. Unfortunately, you could say the same thing about the Bills, where they were able to get to that point, but never get over the hump. The Eagles in the 2000s. That's a real thing. That's a real thing.
Even in the 80s, because the Eagles they were probably the most talented team in the NFC East with their defense. And I know you don't agree with me, but I think Randall Cunningham was a talent.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you there. If there was ever a quarterback who I felt should be in the Hall of Fame because he revolutionized the game,
that's what
Randall Cunningham. Now, was he the all-time best guy? No. He's still number 3 with rushing quarterbacks of all time. So, and the fact that he was able to do everything on that football field. Yeah, I mean, I don't know many other punters that have 90-yard punts to their resume.
Right.
You know what I mean? He could throw the ball 70, 80 yards. That
Easily.
just that to be able the elusiveness of the sack. You know what I mean? Just to be able to get away from certain players and like I said, it's iconic that Monday Night Football where Banks, Banks hits him, he backs up, puts his hand on the ground, and then throws the strike for the touchdown. I mean,
Yeah.
those were the things that those were intangibles. Unfortunately, they didn't have anybody else around him.
That's my point.
Keith
Yeah.
Jackson. We mentioned him earlier.
Myers was there, but that's my point. He didn't have the things that some of these
Mike Quick. If Mike Quick didn't get hurt, Quick didn't get hurt, that may have been the biggest difference.
Yeah.
Because that's why Jackson was so good.
Yep.
Because Quick got hurt and Jackson says, I'll fill those roles. And he did. Yeah. Keith Jackson was, again, I felt the first tight end wide receiver. You know what I mean? Like he was the guy who was able, he was like the first read. And he kind of put tight end on the map in that way. You know what I mean? It was, because I feel that as the tight end role expanded, that's what took away a fullback.
Yeah.
That there's no more fullback now because the tight end is such a more important role than having the guy who's going to just be the lead blocker busting up a line. But that's why you don't see eye packages anymore. There's no such thing.
The only team you really see it with is the 49ers. They use some fullbacks, and but other than that, you don't see a lot of it. You're right.
Right. I think of the wishbone formation. I think about that wishbone formation now when you would have, like, the Eagles have two pretty good running backs. And then if you have two good running backs, a tight end, and two wide receivers, like named Smith, and like that the wishbone formation all of a sudden would be something that could really be, you want to talk about an RPO. This is old school stuff, but sometimes old school comes back in vogue.
It does. It always does that. And you're right about that. But really, what's happening is when I played in high school, we ran the single wing. And it's a lot of similarities to the wishbone. It's just you're not under center. You have your tailback, your wing back, and your quarterback. So it's a lot of similarities, but it's just that's more, and it's hard to defend a single wing because with the unbalanced line and all that stuff, those things happen. But I agree with you that if somebody comes, and who's really done it is Tennessee.
Because you have such the threat with Henry, that Henry is such that player that you don't need the lead blocker for him.
That's right.
Because he's going to block himself by pushing those guys over, as we've seen in so many different places. But he's just so dominant in that regard, where I kind of feel like, running backs that I feel that have been hurt by the fact that there's no longer a fullback.
I agree.
Ezekiel Elliott. I feel Ezekiel Elliott would be a much better running back if there was a fullback, but they don't have one anymore. There's no such thing. There's no.
They don't even have one on their roster.
Right.
They don't have one on their roster. So you're right. You're right.
But I feel that he would be so much better just because you'd have that lead guy and that he's able to operate off of that lead guy. Yeah, that's what made those running backs so much better. That's what made Sweetness so great, was that he was able to see how that lead blocker was going to attack the guy and then be able to pivot because of that. And that's why it looked like he was breaking ankles all the time, because he was able to just shift where he was going based off of just the footwork of the guy who was doing the blocking. Because he could anticipate how the defender was going to attack the blocker and that he was going to be able to go in the opposite direction. And that's something that is not even taught anymore because there's no fullbacks. There is no such thing as that.
And I'll tell you one thing about what they did. Chicago ran what we call a split back. And they had Matt Suhey on one side and they had Peyton. But the problem is people talk about how great of a runner, which he was Peyton. Peyton was even a better blocker because he'd come and he load on the defensive ends, and we had to wear extra thigh pads because he'd hit you in the same spot, and he would give you thigh bruises. He would,
Well, lower center of gravity.
yes,
That's what was the thing. He
yes,
was hitting you. He was hitting you down at below, just at the belt line and below.
yep,
You know,
yeah, he
so
sure
you
was,
when
and he was good at it.
exactly, and because again, because there was speed, so you're just shedding a block,
Yeah.
or now they're pulling and you're open, which I got to imagine is a little interesting in itself, and maybe we'll get into that sometime here in the future, where when you're the guy that you're supposed to go up against pulls, and now all of a sudden you go to engage and there's not anybody to engage, it's like, you got to almost think for a second. Oh, what's about to happen here? You got to look around before you actually start to attack. Again, you would probably speak to this a lot better than I am, because all of this happens in split seconds. It's not like you're standing there going, all right, which way is the play going? Because you go to engage, there's nobody there to engage, and now you're going after the quarterback. You're just following the ball.
Well,
And
every time that the way you were taught, or the way I was taught, when your guy disappeared, you try to redirect him and look down the line to see what's coming at you. And if there's a guard pulling, what we call, you take him on with the outside shoulder and make everything bounce wider, one gap wider, so your linebackers can get into the play, because you wouldn't. So you try to get 2 for 1 in that. And that's how they did it. And that's how, especially with Jimmy Johnson's defense, the flex was totally different. Tom Landry's defense was, because the reason we had so much problem with the Washington football team is because just what you said, they didn't play with a fullback. They played with a one-back set. And our keys was to read the fullback for many years. And when they didn't have that, it took away your key. And that was it, because we were in that flex defense. I was off the line, and I read the guard through the fullback through the guard. And when they did that, they screwed up our whole thing. And they ran that, what we call a counter play. They pulled the guard and the tackle opposite of the play. And it was a pain in the, but Jimmy figured out how to play that with his Miami style defense.
well, and I wonder. So obviously, I mean, that was Reeves who was coaching against Tom Landry.
Yeah.
I got a Dan Reeves.
Oh, no, this was
Not Dan Reeves. That
Joe
Washington. Joe Gibbs. That's what I meant. I'm
Joe
sorry.
Gibbs.
Thank you. And ultimately, because of playing against him for so long, I'm
Exactly.
sure probably saw those tendencies. How many guys? And it'd be interesting. I'm sure he learned that from somebody who went from the Cowboys to Washington.
Well, actually, he didn't. You know where he learned it from? Sid Gilman and all that West Coast stuff. That was all San Diego. That was all San Diego Chargers. And
The Superchargers back in the day.
yeah, because they were always that one back, and they were two tight end sets. And that's where he learned. Joe Gibbs was a disciple of those guys. And it was it gave us, I mean, it was a headache. It was a headache to play with.
Well, and that's now what they call, I guess, a 12-man package.
Yeah,
Where you have the two tight ends, because you really have that offensive line really stacked. It's almost like the equivalent of like a goal line offense. You know what I mean? That's what I kind of liken it as. But because the Eagles would use it a lot, a couple of years ago, because they didn't really have the receivers that were doing anything worthwhile, so they had to go. Their biggest weapons were tight ends. So when you had Ertz and Dallas Goedert, you go with a big package all the time.
There you go.
So and that's where I learned a lot about football, because there were times when I feel like when I understand the play before the play starts, when I look at it and I'm like, hey, listen, if I know it, that means the other team knows it, because they don't pay me big money. So when I'm on a goal line and I see that Zach Ertz ain't out there, well, I immediately think that this is run. We're not going to pass it, because why would Zach Ertz be out there if we were going to pass it? You want the guy open. So now I'm going to key on the run. And I would be so furious, because if I understand this, I got to imagine that the other team's going to understand this too, and that the play wasn't going to work. And that if I'm coaching the team better than the coach is, I've got a problem with that because that coach is getting paid lots of money and I am just a fan, and now I'm a very well-educated fan and that I could see these things a lot faster than everybody else. So I'd be the one yelling at the television.
Yeah, but what they did is they changed the game. When you saw what you call the 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 1 back, automatically you think that those tight ends are in line. Not anymore. They can give you different looks. They could have that tight end, and you used it with Ertz. He was out wide. He might be the widest guy. He might be the second guy in or the third guy in. They'll give you looks now to get you disguises. Now, they could run it or pass it, but with Ertz, if he's number 2, meaning that the second wide receiver in, he can get you out there. He can give you problems because you'll normally have a safety who's not big enough or physical enough to take him on. Or they have to put a linebacker out there. Now they got some weakness inside for the running game. If you have a back and you'll get a couple yards there. It's all disguised now, and that's what they work on.
So you were talking about the flex defense, which was, I guess, more like a 4-4. Was it not? Like that was not like a 4-3.
It was more like a 3-4. It was
More
like
like
a 3-4, and the reason I say that is because we had linebackers, our outside linebackers up on the line, and I was the flex guy. I was off the line, and my keys taught me like a linebacker. Sometimes Randy White would go up, and I'd fold behind him just off if we saw a pulling guard and things like that. And he'd take the guard, and I'd be on the other side of the line of scrimmage. I always had to step in, read the guard, and then if the guard comes my way, I go back to the tackle. It was a pretty interesting defense to play.
But you're saying that was kind of the godfather or the grandfather of the 3-4.
Yes.
That the 3-4 kind of evolved from that.
Yes.
I've always had the interest on what made the 4-6 at the time such a strong defense.
You talking about Buddy Ryan?
Buddy Ryan's 4-6 defense was ridiculously strong defense for the time. Now, obviously, things were a lot different.
The reason is that it was an old defense, and the fronts were hard to defend against because you always had that extra man that you couldn't block. And they say, well, you got your hot. The only one who could throw those hot routes was Dan Marino because everybody else had a hard time trying to do it. But you would have to make sure you got that hot route, meaning that you had to throw the ball fast to it. But they were so good in their secondary being physical, they would take that away from you. And most quarterbacks couldn't complete that. And they were so physically dominant. I mean, he did it at Chicago, and he did it actually better at Philly. People talk about Chicago that 1 year, and they were good. But in Philly, it was really good. I mean, he had better personnel with Reggie, Clyde Simmons, and those guys were. He had Hampton in there, and he didn't probably have – he had some really good linebackers there in Philly. He did do a better job.
Byron Evans.
Byron, yeah.
I mean, I think of him, and I think of Seth Joyner, and I tell you, I run into Seth Joyner on occasion. And I tell you, that guy still looks like he could get out there, and he's got the attitude that still like a really, really nice guy. But you want to talk about just somebody when you go up to say hello to somebody who is a little bit intimidating. That he's just got that look about him, and I that's why I love hearing when he rants. When he's got something to say that he ain't happy about, I love watching him because just that you could tell that the frustration that's why he's got to talk about it because he's not a man of a lot of words.
No, he isn't.
He's somebody who can get his point across very quickly and efficiently by not talking a lot. Which is a rare thing to have just in general, especially for somebody who's an analyst. I mean, he's an Eagles analyst.
Oh, I know.
When you listen to him rant, or even like I said, going up and saying hello, there's an intimidation factor that you run into because he's just that guy, and he's a great guy. He's such a nice guy that you don't need to be afraid of him, but you just get like, whoa, is this guy about to hit me?
Oh man.
And it's
right. I like Seth. I've always liked him. He's a New York guy, and he's got that New York attitude little
Yeah,
upset.
and I think that he was made very well to play in Philly. I mean, that's why he's able to do the things because of the way he is. He
Yeah.
has that Philadelphia grit and attitude that we like.
Yeah.
That working man. Hey, I want this way. I want winners type thing. Like that's what resonates in my head when I think of him. That he's like, I want winners. I want to be able. I want my guys to play. You know, as I say all the time, I want them to bring it every play of every game all
Exactly.
day long. You better bring it, and you better not take any plays off because I never took a play off, and I expect the same thing out of
That's-
everybody around me.
That's exactly right.
And that's that defense. That was that defense as well. If Buddy actually had maybe, and I look at this as if he had a little bit better of an offensive coordinator, somebody and would invest just a small amount into that offense,
Yeah.
they would have won 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
You know, between that and of course the passing of Jerome Brown, unfortunately, that happened. And then of course this all happened during Norman Braman. But it was again, like even during the strike year, this is what really, it was that and how we treated Tom Landry, which was what really got him fired with Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
Because first Tom Landry run up the score on us because they had all their players back, and Buddy Ryan said, "Hey, listen, whether you guys come back together or you're out together, stay together. Do not cross the picket lines against each other. You're in Philadelphia, which is a union town. So just if you're going to cross, everybody cross together or nobody cross." And you know what? The players really respected him for saying stuff like that because he understood where he was.
Yeah.
He Philadelphia, you don't cross the picket line. Like that's just, we were a union town.
My father is straight union. Hey, but it's 9:00.
Yep.
We got to get out.
Yeah, I'm looking at my time and I forgot I started a little late.
We were having such a good time. We were having such a good time.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it, these times goes by really quickly. So
Yeah.
I appreciate everybody for coming in and watching us today. And I'm going to replay this a little later. So if you want to catch up, if you didn't see it all, you can see it all again somewhere around 1:00. I'm going to go ahead and put it right back on there again. But I appreciate everybody for coming on. And you can see on Wednesday, you'll see Jim and Byron and James talking shop.
We got some interesting stuff. And we're going to start having some guests starting. We might have one this week, but I know next week we'll have a guest.
Yeah, right? and you never know if I might pop in on occasion like I did last week because they were egging me on. They were trying to get me on the show last week. So, but everybody, thank you very much. Have a great Sunday, and we will see you next